Hi, guys. Are y'all ready?
And then we have a key conversation about why advancement at Jesuit universities is so important. And we're very, very lucky to be together today. And we want this to be a very interactive and honest discussion. There'll be time for questions that you can use the Q&A little button there at the bottom of your Zoom screens, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the session, and you'll be able to hopefully, again, lead the discussion where we need it to go today. And we have two wonderful presenters leading us on this journey, Dr. Robert Parmach and Father David Suwalsky. Dr. Parmach serves as the inaugural director of Ignatian Mission Initiatives in the Office of the Vice President for Mission Integration and Ministry at Fordham, where he also teaches philosophy and theology. A native of New York, Rob graduated from Xavier High School, earned a BA in philosophy with classics distinction from Fairfield University, where he ran cross country and track, and his MA and Ph.D. from Fordham. He started his career in student affairs as a counselor and peer educator before becoming academic dean of first-year students at Fordham College at Rose Hill, where he served as a faculty director of its Manresa Scholars Integrated Learning Community for first-year students and coordinator of the Southmore West Wing Ignatian Leadership Program. Father Suwalsky currently serves as vice president for mission and identity at St. Louis University. He earned his doctorate in American Studies from SLU in 2010. He holds a Master of Theology degree in American Religious Experience from Harvard, a Master of
Yeah, that was plenty. Well, we'll see if we can get Meg back, but perhaps Rob and I can get us rolling here. It's a real pleasure to have an opportunity to be with you all today, and I hope that these next couple of days are really useful for you all. As Meg was saying, I'm vice president here at St. Louis University. I'm just will be starting my 4th year in this position as vice president. And we have been doing a lot of work at St. Louis U with the development team as they go out and enlist support for the university. And that's been a great opportunity for me to talk with graduates, the donors and benefactors, to explain a little more in depth about the distinctive elements of our identity as a Catholic and Jesuit university, those distinctive elements that differentiate us for say here in St. Louis from the University of Missouri or from Washington University, but the same that you all have that same experience wherever your universities are found. And so we hope for the next 45 to 50 minutes that Rob and I can shed a little bit of light on that. I'll pass it over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Dave. Welcome, everybody. As a teacher, I always like to start with a quotation. I think it helps frame our thinking. So I have a good one from Ignatius, and I find that many people never heard of this one. It's a little too long for a bumper sticker, so I'll say it slowly for you. He says, that which makes you feel the most alive in what you do is where God is. I'll say it again. That which makes you feel the most alive in what you do is where God is. So whether you're a teacher in a classroom, whether you're a pastoral minister, whether you're our development officer, hopefully you're all sharing in this same mission, right? Even if you're not a religious believer or a person of faith, right? That which makes you feel the most alive is where God is where the good is, right? The work and the value in what in fact we do day in and day out. So I want you to keep that in mind. What really animates your spirit? What animates your spirit? And even if you're not working with mission integration and ministry or campus ministry, or speaking specifically about Ignatian spirituality, as an advancement administrator, you're a member of the company that's trying to get other people to dig deep into this animation, into what really makes you alive, what really gives you that spunk and spirit that's contagious. So keep that in mind as we're talking today. I'm a big fan of using alliteration and different things so my students remember stuff. Also, it keeps me better on track too. So I have the first one for you, something that I'm calling RRR, the 3 R's, okay, the 3 R's. You have to be real, you have to be relevant, and then hopefully you become revelatory. Real, relevant, and revelatory. So let's take a little time to unpack what we're talking about here in terms of the mission, to look at some of our Jesuit identity and our roots. Now, some of you may have been working at Jesuit institutions for decades. Others may have joined 3 weeks ago or somewhere in between. So very, very briefly, Ignatian spirituality, the focus of our mission, is really rooted in a lived spirituality. It's one that's rooted in the world. It's a felt presence of God and the good work that we're doing together. So let's start us off, go back in history to 1521, and I promise I'll be brief. Ignatius had his own in-the-world life experience. It's a young guy who had his head set on the executive fast track in terms of his military prowess, being an officer, being charismatic, influential, gaining a lot of wealth and prestige. This was his 10-year plan, so to speak. And God had a different one for him. So he's out in battle, and unexpectedly, a cannonball shattered his right kneecap and severely wounded his left. So right away, in 2 seconds, this guy's 10-year plan, executive fast track, crumbled in front of him. And I offer this story because it gets us to better understand Ignatius the man, so that we can delve a little deeper into the sense of what animates his spirit. Right? So this is a real person in real life. And I often joke and say he was definitely a sinner before he became a saint. So the idea here is that the more you grapple with the reality of what's going on, that's the first R, what's real. Okay. Realizing that you have different constituents. Some are super fans of the university with nostalgic ideas from 50 years ago. You have brand new people who just graduated who have a different mindset. You have some people that are heavily involved in the work of Jesuit education in their day in, day out. You have other people who episodically connect back to their alma mater at a jubilee or some type of homecoming, and everything in between. My advice is that the more you can relay a story that shows the reality of what we're dealing with, the more people will find it compelling. So this was Ignatius, right? He was a hard-head guy who had bad habits, and little by little, he came to recognize that, you know what, if I'm going to do some rehabilitation of the body, little by little, he came to realize I need to do some rehabilitation of the soul. Okay. So first off, that I think is important to think about is Jesuit spirituality. Our mission as institutions is really to sort of try to make that animated spirit contagious, to look at things realistically at where we stand. If you are asking them to support you financially or otherwise with a certain targeted item, well, we need help, not just simply to get money or to get support, but we're running this program that deals with people. And this is what they're trying to do. And this is why it's important. And this is why the story matters. That, I think, for me, is the real important sense of the reality of what's going on. Second R is the relevance, right? And I tell my students this as well. I'm not pandering to them, and I'm not trying to just say what they want to hear. But if my words to them are not relevant to their life, then that's on me, right? In many ways, you want to make sure that your story that you're telling, the emphasis that you're giving them, is relevant to their life, even if, in fact, they graduated 60 years ago and they're not understanding the day in and day out of what Jesuit education is working with today. That somehow it's relevant to their professional life, their spiritual life, their life as given a certain profession that they're in, whether they're a Little League coach, whether they're working on Wall Street, or they're a tech startup person, right? This idea of relevance really matters. And the more stories that you can glean from your respective universities that tell that story, that I think is really compelling to me. And the last R is revelatory. So, let the Spirit do the work for you. Once you present yourself as real and sincere and genuine, once you see the reality of the relevance, the work that you're doing, how it's improving the world, your institution, and Jesuit education for new generations, then let the work sit with them. right? This idea of let it be their own revelation, their own epiphany moment. And I'll give you some examples later on of numerous quick little 20-second stories, I call them, that have made a real impact in the way I see my work at a Jesuit school, but also my own sense of spirituality and why this whole endeavor matters. So later on, I'll share a couple of those with you as well. Dave, if you want to chime in.
Sure. 2 years ago, we celebrated the 500th anniversary of that cannonball moment. And so my office developed stress balls in the shape of cannonballs. So from canon to canonization, so to speak. And we had this running joke that oftentimes in Jesuit institutions, both at the universities as well as secondary schools, and that whenever we do orientation for staff, we always end up stopping with the cannonball. And then we don't tell the rest of the story. The rest of the story for Ignatius, of course, is this incredibly tedious reality of recovering. I guess another R here, right? He's trapped in the family castle. He wants something to read. He's looking for the medieval versions of romance novels, basically, and the entire library in the Loyola household is a life of the saints, lives of the saints, and the life of Christ. So he's reduced to actually reading pious theology. And he actually is kind of taken up by that because this sense of imagination that he had, as Rob is referring to, is this 10-year plan of being in the court and of finding an aristocratic lady and making a great marriage and advancing in that way. All is kind of going by the wayside here. And he takes all of that energy and imagination and imagines himself following in the footsteps of people like St. Dominic and St. Francis of Assisi. As he goes on, he starts analyzing his experiences and realizing when he starts thinking about all of those things that were important to him before, they don't bring him much joy. But when he starts thinking about being one of the great heroes of the faith, then that's lasting. And he becomes more and more intrigued. And as he says in his own autobiography, the Lord was working with him step by steps, as if a schoolmaster was teaching a pupil. And he goes from that experience, once he's recovered and able to move, he goes from that experience to the Benedictine monastery at Manresa and spends more than a year there in private prayer doing these horrible penances that actually caused him physical harm as he got older. But in those enlightened moments that he had, he begins taking notes, and those notes he will codify in what we know today as the spiritual exercises. So anyone who works in a Jesuit institution or has an experience of a Jesuit education will at some point hear about the spirituality of the Society of Jesus, and that spirituality is deeply rooted and deeply personal into the spiritual experience of St. Ignatius and in the spiritual exercises that he desires to share with other people. And I think that's really important for us as a Jesuit university to refer back to that moment and the dynamics of the spiritual exercises, because it's at once very personal. It guides you through the stories of Jesus's life, but it also is specifically intended to lead you to an election. When you complete the retreat, you are asked to make a choice. Presumably, when that was first done, when first experienced, it was to Jesuits, and that choice was to remain as a Jesuit and then to move on to ordination. But for lay folk, that choice is, how do I want to live in the world? What do I want to do in the world? How do my skills, my talents, my abilities, my resources, how can that shape the world for the better? And of course, within the Jesuit educational model, part of what we're doing as a university is training our young people, educating our young people to take those talents, skills, abilities, and resources and place them in service to the world so that the world might become a better place. So when you're talking to potential donors or benefactors or alums, what we need to do is demonstrate how we are in fidelity to that spirituality, in the sense that how does a Fordham, how does a St. Louis U, how does a Loyola New Orleans do what it does to shape the world so that it might become a better place? And that's how they become partners with us. They can lend their experience, their resources in order to continue the mission of the church and of the societies as it's expressed at our institutions.
When I was in first grade, I was on a Little League baseball team, and we were undefeated. We won the championship. We got the cheesy jackets and everything. But I recently came across the photograph of the team. The only one smiling is the coach. The only one smiling was the coach. And I remember why. We feared him big time. So we did what he wanted, and we did all the drills, and we, did very well in terms of the athletic success. But we were never connected to the team. My next year, we had a different coach, and she actually was even tougher on us, but we believed in her. She had this sense of, we're doing this together. So she was tough, but in many ways too, she really got us to believe that we're doing this together. So I think any ways that you can get that across when you're talking to people, that not only does it matter, and we're trying to get to the finish line in successful ways, but that the reason why you're working at a Jesuit institution is because you believe in what you're doing. You're trying to get them to not just simply buy into it, but to feel its presence. I was speaking to a student this past year, and I asked the question to the group, and I said, what is distinctive about Jesuit education? A lot of other schools have academic excellence. They can tout very impressive statistics, job placements, careers, and such and such. But I said, what specifically about our Ignatian mission really speaks to you, 18, 19-year-old? Okay. And one student said it, I think, quite articulately. She says, well, I understand the mission, right? I'm using my head and I'm rigorously examining what the school is about, its principles, its focus. She says, over time, it comes down to the body. From my head, it goes to my heart. She says, I believe in the mission. She says, I honestly and earnestly, would go to bat for the mission. She says, but what makes it distinctive for me is not simply that I understand it, that I believe it, but then she reaches out her hands and she says that I feel it. I feel it in the classroom. I feel it with my RA, who is helping me, struggle with some things and get through it. She says, I see it with the cafeteria worker who's patient with me because I don't understand all the meal plans yet. I just started school. She says it's the public safety officer who realizes that I'm homesick. So he took it upon himself to befriend me. So I feel like I know somebody every day when I come into the building, and he knows my name, and that, the t-shirt that I had on that had some funny cartoon, and he makes the joke with me too. It's that kind of felt presence that really is the compelling, I think, distinctive quality. And I feel in many ways, that's exactly what it is, right? It's articulating those stories. I had mentioned that I have a number of these, and I'll just share a few very quick ones with you, okay? Not just simply do I understand it in my head, not simply do I believe it in my heart, but there's the third H now, that I use my hands and I feel it within the presence, right? When we hear of the phrase of, finding God in all things, this is what we're getting at, that it's a very corporal type of experience, right? Ignatius was big on using his 5 senses, just like someone would savor a meal and, relish an idea. This is the idea that we're using our whole being to not only give God glory, but to see his active work in the world, and even within ourselves, even sometimes in spite of ourselves, right? So if this helps you, we have the RRR, the real, relevant, and revelatory. Now we have the 3 H's. To make sure that you're finding ways that show that it's compelling in their head, intellectually, in their heart, in terms of their beliefs and what their convictions are, but also their hands, right? So when Father was speaking about that we're making the world better, it's not just a nice tagline that any corporation could talk about, but explain the ways in which we're doing that. Our commitment to social justice, preferential option of the poor. In a few minutes, I'll give some examples from the apostolic preferences that actually show that we're making this happen in the world. It's not just nice ideas in some noble ivory tower or some beliefs that we hold true, but that we're actually sharing it with other people and getting our hands dirty. That's the value of Jesuit education today. So here's some of these quick little stories. It's the Friday night before an alumni Jubilee weekend at Fordham, and I'm in our intercampus van on my way to the other campus. And all of a sudden, I hear someone yell, "Hold the van." And I tell the driver, "Hold up, I think someone's trying to hail a van in New York." Sure enough, the guy comes in, out of breath, He graduated Fordham 50 years ago. He sits next to me. He's so delighted, number one, that the van stopped for him in New York. But number two, he says, you know, I have to come here every year, no matter how old I get and how difficult it is to be. And we're talking, and wouldn't you know it, his roommate is a professor who teaches here now that I work with and know very well. So he thinks that's, you know, funny as anything. We're talking this and that. And he said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, tomorrow morning I'm going with students to Mississippi because we're doing a mission volunteer type of project, what we call global outreach at Fordham. And we'll work with foster kids in the diocese and, you know, talk about getting to sort of use head, heart, and hands, you know, in the rural South and really show the experience. I said we had a formation process this whole semester with the students. We did some spiritual things. We did some service. We did some interior work. And now we're going to go down there to sort of complete the circle. He says, that's terrific. When I started at Fordham, we had one or two kinds of things like that. Now I'm so happy that this is something that's systemic. Hundreds of students do it a year. It's something that we put time, energy, money, and resources into. It's worth it. He says, I'm a physician. I see the value in it. So like even just that quick little story reminded and humbled me that, you know, the work that we're doing in the world matters. And this guy is compelled. And he says to me, that's why I donate to Fordham. That's why I'm committed to Jesuit education. That matters to me. When I was an academic dean, I would line up the kids for graduation. And there was one student who was there who pulls me aside, and I'm stressed because I'm trying to get their names down, that they're in the right order. And he says, oh, you know, Professor, I'm really, you know, want to say thank you for everything you've done for me. I said, yeah, no problem. And he's like, you know, because when I was a first year student, I was kind of like, and he's hemming and hawing, and I'm stressed because I'm trying to make sure he's in line on time. I said, yeah, you were a pain in the neck when you were a freshman. And he starts laughing. And I said, but you know what? You're not today. Right. So that transformation, you see the value that the student has had from first year, where, with all due respect, he was a little entitled and full of himself. But you know what? We didn't graduate that kid. We graduated an adult who's mature, who works hard, and who's a reflective human being. Right. The St. Patrick's Day parade, when we're marching with our school, and someone yells from the outside, hey, you put me on probation 15 years ago. And I looked at the student and he says, that was the best thing that Fordham did for me because I was lazy, I wasn't working hard, and you called me to task. But he said, you supported me, you followed me, you didn't give up on me. So these are the kind of, I think, compelling stories and lessons, right? When my father died in the middle of a summer 10 years ago, and not only did Fordham people come to the wake and funeral mass, but friends of mine and celebrated on the altar the Jesuits that were there for me, for my family. That's what matters to me. That's why I'm here. That's what is a compelling story. It's not just simply something people understand, believe in, but it's really felt a presence, right? That personal contact, that really does matter. That's what I think makes us distinctive in many ways.
Having had experience working with the development team at St. Louis U and in other experiences as well, and then as the chief mission officer, you know, this may come as a surprise to y'all. There's some grumpy people out there in the world today. And oftentimes in my office, I'm the one who gets the emails saying that we're not Catholic and we're not Jesuit anymore. And what it oftentimes means is what the modern Jesuit university doing today is different than their experience of a Jesuit university when they were in school. And I think it's really important to not only listen to those people and those critiques, but to also help to educate, help to assist in their understanding of what a contemporary education at a Jesuit university looks like today. Because things are different, right? There's no mandatory chapel anymore. A core curriculum that would have typically included required 12 hours in philosophy, 9 in theology, 4 years of that sort of thing. Those sorts of requirements aren't there anymore. Shoot, you're going to be talking with benefactors and alumni who were going to these schools when they were all men, for example, and now they're co-ed. And they were mostly Catholic, and now that identity is much more diffused. And then the social challenges that we find today, and identity, and who people see themselves as, and how we work with them, all of that is different. But with Rob talking about stories, one of the things I think we need to be able to point to as well is what has remained the same. And what has remained the same is a desire to help younger people find their place in the world, to express compassion when it's needed, to be assertive in a way of this is right and this was not right, which is why you were suspended, and as to see people as human beings, not as folders and not as numbers, not as inconvenience. I think of a different time, different career at St. Louis University when I was director of museums and galleries. And one day I got a call from the security officer at the main desk of the art museum. And he said, do you know Senator Eagleton? And I said, well, I know of him, but I've not met him. He said, well, he's standing here and he would like to talk to you. So by this time, Tom was in his mid-80s. He had retired after 3 terms in the US Senate. Some of you might remember he was the 1972 vice presidential candidate. That didn't go too well. And retired back to St. Louis, was a partner at one of the major law firms here. And he came in, I came upstairs, and he said, you need to come down to my car. And we went to this beat up Honda Civic. And he opened up the trunk and he pulled out 3 paintings, contemporary artworks. And we went back inside the museum and he said, I'd like you to have these. And I said, okay. I said, Tom, what's going on here? And he said, I got to tell you a story. And it's like this. It was the middle of the Depression. My dad had graduated from high school, started to work immediately to help the family. And then he decided he wanted to be a lawyer. So he went to St. Louis U Law School and he got hooked up with a Jesuit. And the Jesuit told him, he said, I don't know how this will work. You don't have a college degree. I'm not sure you'll be able to do the work of a law school student. But he said, I'll tell you what, I'll sign you up for a semester and you come and see me after the grades are posted in December. And then we'll talk some more. Did that for 6 semesters, graduated with a law degree, passed the bar, had a distinguished career. And Tom looked at me and he said, I wish I knew that Jesuit's name, but he changed my life. I would not have been able to do whatever I was able to do in my career if it were not for my father and what he was able to do for my family. So those stories are out there, those experiences are out there, and we need to find those and then help people understand that people with similar compassion and similar interest in helping the world become a better place, those stories are also happening at our universities today. But it's that fundamental reality that if everyone is created in the image and likeness of God and all are deserving of respect and dignity and opportunity, we have so much more freedom at our universities to do that, because that is so much in aligned with our Catholic values, our gospel values, and the Jesuit spirituality that infuses our works. So as much as you can learn more about what are the foundational principles that help keep us going, that brought us into being, and then to share those with our benefactors is a way of then connecting them with the stories that align with their interests so that they can be change agents for the future and for the future of our schools as well.
I recently gave a presentation to an administrative group here at Fordham, and I used the reference of the apostolic preferences. So many of you perhaps have heard of these. The Jesuits have come up with 4 major priorities that are considered apostolic preferences, right? What we're aiming towards. And what I tried to do is give them concrete examples of how our university, Fordham, is participating in each of these 4 goals. So I'm just going to offer them to you because that might be another compelling vehicle by which you can explain to people not only that it matters, but why it matters. So these 4 apostolic preferences. The first is to show a path to God through the spiritual exercise. So even if you're not a Jesuit, even if you're not working in campus ministry, even if you're not a professor in a theology course, right? There are creative ways in which you can show a path to God. It might be an indirect path. It might be something that you're encouraging people to participate in, whether it be a learn and lunch type of series, a retreat, an opportunity, a trip, whatever it might be. But creative ways in which you're showing a path that there's more to life than just the material world, that there's a value to dig deeper into the interior life of who you are. Can't tell you how many times I talk to everyone from first-year students to VPs and everyone in between that always value taking some time to nourish the interior life of the person, right? So ways in which you can show the path to God, and you could do that in a variety of ways, right? Ignatius had a lot of desires. And remember, desires need not be evil things that we have to run away from. You could lean into your desires, right? And if it's done in an ordered way, Ignatius would say, that brings forth the greater glory, then go for it. So if you're a public speaker, use that talent. If you're a musician, use that talent. If you have a kind of quirky, interest in X, Y, or Z, use that for the greater good. This is the idea behind it, showing a path to God. The second one is to walk with the marginalized, right? To walk with the disenfranchised, right? So try to find ways in which your university is actually practicing what they preach. So one thing I talked about with that alum was our global outreach program, where he was really compelled to say, wow, like our students do a formation process. It's not just simply a quick little weekend trip and we go home. But this went on for 20 weeks, this whole engagement. And we have things thereafter too. This is what Father was speaking about that transforms your life. Guess what? When they were camp counselor down there, they learned more about the socioeconomics. So guess what? Now my student is interested in social work. This is going to be a career move for them, not just a nice thing that they did, quote unquote, to help somebody. Right? The third one, perhaps, is an obvious apostolic preference, is to accompany youth, right? So again, even if you're not a resident director or a teacher or someone in charge of a student organization, you are accompanying youth in a variety of ways. So ways in which you can get across compelling stories of why it matters to the youth and these stories of transformation, it works. The last one is care for the common home, care for the common home. So this is not just simply, green ecology type of things, but the sense of, it's rooted in the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, that we're stewards of the earth. We take care of this place and we take care of one another. So ways in which they can see that these four preferences are actually alive and animating our spirit. It's in alignment with what makes us distinctively Jesuit and Catholic today. Again, showing a path to God through the spiritual exercises. Secondly, walking with the marginalized, the disenfranchised. Third, accompanying the youth. And fourth, caring for the common home. This is what really matters, I think, in many ways.
I think it's important to, when we talk about particularly our undergraduates, how much caring for the common home really resonates with younger people today. But I think in general, the whole spirit of the preferences, which were developed after a 2-year process of consultation with Jesuit works from not just the US, but from around the world, and with the further reflection offered by Pope Francis. And if anybody's listening to Pope Francis and you're in a Jesuit environment, you definitely know Pope Francis is a Jesuit, right? Because this language just comes organically from him, from his training, his reading, and his own experience as a member of the Society of Jesus. These preferences become so important because they allow us to key into other areas that perhaps don't have the religious language to it, but nonetheless reflects interests in our society today. So who is not going to be supportive of creating a hope-filled future for young people? I mean, that's what we are all about, if we're parents or if we're educators, is to create that hope-filled future, especially when we're confronting a society that tends to be more comfortable in identifying flaws, weaknesses, and wrongs, as opposed to identifying blessings and gifts and hopes. So I think it was a really excellent exercise on the part of the Society of Jesus to make those available as kind of our deep talking points, as it were. One of the things that I think is really important for us is sometimes, as was mentioned at the very beginning, there's a lot of those terms out there, the Jesuit lingo, the Jesuit vocab, that we're comfortable with that may be a little bit more opaque to some people on this call, or maybe some of our donors and benefactors. The term men for others was developed by Father Pedro Arrupe in the late 1960s when he gave an address to the Association of International Alumni of Jesuit Universities. And of course, that was about 67 before any of the schools had gone co-ed. And so men for others then becomes men and women for others, and then goes to men and women for and with others, because The idea of engagement is not just to solely bring something to someone else who might be in need, but it's also the opportunity for that person to learn from the experience, the hopes, dreams, and desires of that person that they're with, that they're serving. And so part of that dynamic also works with benefactors and donors as well. What are their passions? What are their great desires? What do they see at a Fordham or a St. Louis U that we're doing well, that they would like to become a part of, that they would like to nurture and see it grow so that it becomes a catalyst for change and becomes one of those opportunities to create hope or to create a difference in our world in matters of climate and environment, which of course extends far beyond just climate, but what are the climate impacts that challenge so many people today? You think about some of the other, we just finished 10 rounds of SLU 101, which is done for our incoming freshmen. And, we just say cura personalis as if St. Ignatius wrote that down as part of the spiritual exercises. And honestly, we poached that from a lot of other people. But this notion of caring for the whole person is so deeply embedded in who we are in our identity as Catholic and Jesuit institutions. And this is also something that really needs to be shared with others, that we're just not only about transmitting knowledge, sharing data, but it's also the question of how does that experience at a St. Louis University or Loyola New Orleans, how is that impactful on one's mental status, one's physical world, one's emotional world? And what are we doing, and how does that shape our response to our colleagues and to our students and also to our donors, our benefactors? Because if we are looking at people as whole persons, then our obligation extends beyond assigned readings. And it means that we accept the responsibility to listen to one another, to be with one another, to encourage one another, and at times even to challenge one another. I think if there was one good thing that came out of our experience of the pandemic, it was this. It put to rest this notion that education is merely the transmission of information. And that at a Jesuit institution, it's the accidental encounters, it's the outside of classroom moments, whether it's at a ball game or whether it's in a dining hall or whether it's just on your floor at a residence hall. Those are the things that also become essential parts of your experience as a student. And those are the exact same things that many of our benefactors refer back to when they are talking to development officers and to others who are connected to the university. There may be, that exemplary professor, but there are other encounters that make up what it is to be in their minds, their Jesuit education. Another story real quickly. We had a donor whose parents were going through, this is back in the 70s, going through a pretty rocky divorce. But one of the things that dad had agreed to was to pay for his education at St. Louis U. And after the first year, he got called into the bursar's office and said, your father's not paying anything, so you're going to have to leave St. Louis U. And this kid was just distraught. It was the one thing that was really solid in his life. And he had enough gumption that he marched himself straight up to the president's office, to Father Reinert, and got an appointment. And he sat down with Father Reinert, who was well into his 30th year as president of St. Louis U, poured his heart out. And Paul just listened and listened and listened. And Paul said to him, okay, I understand. He said, I tell you what, don't you worry about this anymore. I want you to be a graduate. I think you'll be the kind of graduate of St. Louis U that we will look to in the future. That was true when he came up with a 9-figure gift to support the arena and a named opportunity for the business school. And Rick tells that story over and over again about how that compassionate care and listening was transformative to his life and shaped his future, and in turn allowed him to do what he's managed to accomplish in this life as well. Those are the things that make those stories, those experiences that help pave the way for you to develop a relationship with those donors and to find places where those experiences connect with the next generation of graduates of St. Luke's U.
I always advise people outside of the classroom to go to a class once in a while. You could respectfully invite yourself, ask a teacher, can I sit in on your class? Or can I come to this meeting or an experience? Because there are so many great stories that I find are untapped just because they're not necessarily always in the paper type of thing. I was a freshman at Fairfield University, nervous, naive, scared. And I had a course by Jesuit Father Tom Regan, who's at Fordham now. And I was very impressed in the class. He's a great teacher, charismatic. You could tell he really gave it his all. So I was pretty much sold, like, this is the right place for me. And all of a sudden, that was a Friday morning with class. Saturday morning at 7 a.m., I was on cross country. We had a meet that was our own invitational, and we're running up Bellarmine Hill, very high ascent. And out of the corner of my eye, I see Father Regan behind a tree with a cigar, and it's 7 a.m. And he yells at me a phrase from one of the quoted texts that we just studied the day before that basically was saying, like, give it your all type of thing. You ought to become who you are. We were reading Kierkegaard and other thinkers at the time. And I can't tell you, I never ran as quickly up Bellarmine Hill to this day, okay? But what really impressed me was the fact that, like, he was there, he got up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, he didn't have to do that, to support me, a student in his class, right? So guess what? That Monday morning, I was sold, right? I gave it my all the same way he did for me, right? That kind of personal touch mattered. And then years go on. I go my way, he goes his way. Oh, guess who writes me a recommendation? Guess who gets me involved in this? Guess who greases the wheel for something else, right? There's this kind of connection that you feel not just an obligation, but a kind of, connection of goodness that you're doing in many ways, right? Many years ago, I remember reading a very short one-page article by a Jesuit by the name of Bob Mitchell. And he basically articulates 5 characteristics of a good Jesuit education. And they really make a lot of sense to me. The first is, he says that we have a high commitment to excellence, right? So clearly in and out of the classroom, we speak about excellence and rigor. But if you can find ways in which you can articulate that by individual student testimonies, faculty, staff, that we push people to really thrive, not just simply get through a course of study, I think it matters. The second one is obviously through the core curriculum and other ways that we're committed to a Renaissance education, right? So when Father spoke about, educating the entire person, head, heart, and hands, right? That you're taking courses, you're having opportunities to really stretch yourself, head, heart, and hands. That's the curriculum that life requires you to be good about. A future employer, right? She can teach you the technical aspects of a job. She can teach you the operating system, how to deal with clients, but she can't teach you how to think critically. She can't teach you how to develop and defend a compelling argument. She can't teach you to care. That's what we're really good at Jesuit schools, not just simply to become knowledgeable, but to care about people and the problems of the world. The third one is we focus a lot on morals, values, and choice, and not just simply in a philosophy or theology class, right? So the more that they can see that there's a nice realistic intersection with how it is to be a moral person, an ethical person, a relevant person in the world today, through the curriculum, I think the more that they can see that it matters, right? Last, whether they're a religious person or not, whether they're a person of faith or not, that our education is one that really gets people to dig deeper into the interior self, right? That there is a value to be receptive to the spiritual life. Right? And then lastly, our hallmark is this care of the whole person. This is what really matters, I think, in so many ways. I remember being a well-intentioned but nervous, sophomore at Fairfield, and I applied for something in orientation to help out. But I realized what I really needed to improve upon was my public speaking skills. I had the grades, I had other criteria down, but I wasn't comfortable, and I knew that this position would have me in front of parents and students and this and that. So I remember mentioning it to one of my teachers, and he says, okay, we're going to work on this, but you have to give me your all. I said, okay. This guy spent weekly with me 2 hours for 15 weeks, a whole semester, one-on-one public speaking help that he gave me. Before his class, after his class, it was something that he clearly didn't need to do. I was extremely grateful of it. And I think it not only helped me, but again, this sense of, he really cared about me as a person, not only to land the internship or the job, but to show why Jesuit education matters, I think in many ways, right? I use this term a lot, and if it helps you, please use it. Good Jesuit education is all about soul education, S-O-U-L, right? S-O-U-L. We're trying to help people build up their souls, right? There's a reason why Ignatius called it the spiritual exercises. Just like you have physical exercises for the body, spiritual exercises are trying to get you to tone up a flabby soul, right? In many ways in which you're trying to dig a little deeper to better understand what you're called to be and the best version of it too. Think of the animated self. Remember, I started off with the quotation, that which makes you feel the most alive in what you do is where God is. I know we have a webinar format here and we don't see your faces, you see ours, and there's lots of people on here, which is great. But maybe just in terms of participation, if you're so inclined, I offer you right now to just pop in a theme that is striking you from what we're talking about so far in the Q&A, just so we can get a sense of perhaps some of the themes that are resonating with you. So if you're willing to do so, to just throw in the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen, just pop in a theme or a question that you're thinking about at this point of our conversation. And then the panelists are able to look at them.
As you're doing that, also, oftentimes when I do presentations, I always end up starting with Gerard Manley Hopkins and the great line. So the Jesuit poet of the late 19th century, who's memorialized in Poets' Corner at Westminster Abbey. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. And that whole world is very much reflective of kind of the Jesuit concept of mission, which is all things under the heavens and on the earth is the mission field, that everything that's created is filled with God's grandeur, and we just have to find it, look for it, not be afraid of the answers that we'll discover if we're going into areas that are unknown or to us. And I think that's one of the great gifts of the Jesuit University, is that we can look at people and say, because this is our starting point, that God creates and what God creates is good, that we can explore and we can use our talents, our intellects in order to uncover that grandeur in this created world in which we live and move us past kind of the negative and the ugly and the broken in the world, not to just pretend it's not there, but to find those answers and find that grandeur that will help make that world less broken, less ugly, and more open to those people who are not as fortunate as we are fortunate. So I'm seeing some of those ideas here, the 3 R's, caring for the whole person, dignity, depth, and playing the long game with our students and alums. All of those things are great outcomes for this quick conversation. Rob, I think we're kind of coming to the point where we're going to close it down with a brief examine.
We are. So thanks everybody for participating. What I'd invite you to do now is, if possible, to close your eyes without falling asleep. And what I like to do is just guide you through a brief Ignatian examen, right? An examen's intention is to give yourself a little time to do a quick self-inventory, right? It's not a test or a quiz to be graded, but rather an opportunity for you to see where God is animated in your daily life, right? So it's an offering for you. Please feel free to use it as you see fit. For some, it's a prayer. For others, it's good self-psychology. For others, it could be both, right? A sort of quick little timeout where you're accounting for not only the presence of God in your life, but your responses to them, right? So try to get a sense of what are your habits? What are your attitudes? What are your reactions to different people? And it's a very concrete type of experience. It's not simply some heady intellectual thing, but it's something that, like I mentioned earlier, it's felt in the world, right? To see God in all things. So I just invite you, and I use this often acronym called GRACE, G-R-A-C-E. So I'll just guide you for the next 3 minutes on this GRACE, G-R-A-C-E. So first, try to relax your body. Take a deep breath or two. Forget about all the emails in your inbox. Take a little time for you. The first letter is G for gratitude. For whom or what are you most grateful for today? For whom or what are you most grateful for today? Try to answer that question in your own heart. For whom or what are you most grateful for today? The next letter is R for requesting light. What does light do? Light gives us clarity, hope, and vision. Light gives us clarity, hope, and vision. Without judgment, where do you need a little light, a little clarity in your life today? Try to name it. Where are you requesting light and clarity in your life today? Try to name it. The next letter is A for attitude. Whether you're proud of it or not, what has been your predominant attitude towards the world today? What has been your predominant attitude towards the world today? And where has your attitude perhaps blinded you from seeing the goodness of what's in front of you? The next letter is C for charting your course, charting your course. What's one thing tomorrow that you really want to improve in your spiritual life? Try to name it specifically. What's one thing you really want to improve upon in your spiritual life for tomorrow? The last letter is E for enthusiasm, for enthusiasm. What will be the source or motivation for you to want to improve for tomorrow? Try to name the source or the motivation that will get you to want to make that improvement for tomorrow. I invite you to open your eyes. So we have this word, grace, G-R-A-C-E, gratitude, requesting light, attitude, charting your course, and enthusiasm. Gratitude, requesting light, attitude, charting your course, and enthusiasm. On behalf of Fordham, and I know my colleagues would agree, our other partner institutions, the work that you do really does matter. You need to be reminded of that in case you don't hear that enough. So number one, thank you. Secondly, it's important because you continue the story, right? Just like my freshman student gave me that insight this past year. We not only understand the mission, we not only believe in it over time, but we actually feel it, right? And if it's something that we can say from our own experience, even our falters, right? Even when we mess up, we learn a lot of goodness about people and the value of God in our life and finding God in all things with one another, right? So ways in which you can see that story not only matters, but is compelling. For me, that's always been the distinctive quality of transforming Jesuit education.
I do want to say thank you, and I want to encourage you all to keep the notion of relationship in mind here, that oftentimes development officers are kind of key to find resources for programs or for a new building or something like that. But ultimately, what your job and our jobs, Rob's and my job, is to create a space for young people to have a chance for a future that will make a difference for all of us. Sometimes that means facilities. Oftentimes it means scholarship and other support. And it means it gets us the resources to bring more and more people of greater diverse backgrounds into our campuses and to see them as our graduates in the future. So it's important, vital work. And I really appreciate all that you do in order to make our institutions work for the greater glory of God. So thanks for your efforts, and I hope your meetings go well. And I believe Meg has an announcement or two to close this off. You're muted.
I just wanted to take the time to thank everyone for being a part of this, but especially our two presenters who gave us an extraordinary amount to think about. I know that my grateful is that I get to work at such a mission-centered and mission-driven institution and partner with all of you, that I'm grateful I'm going to get to be in New Orleans next week again with everyone. And we can continue these conversations. There is a mission track. There's lots of great sessions there, but we can continue the conversations at breakfast and at lunch and over cocktails and all those good places and all those good things that happen at conferences. So again, thank you for everyone for taking the time out today to, I think, give us a really good kickoff to our time together next week. So thanks everyone for joining us.
My email is simply my last name, parmach@fordham.edu. If you wanted to ask any questions, I'm happy to speak to you further.
Same for me, Suwalsky@slu.edu.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.